All right, so HTTP server. So the first thing is we're just going to try to get this example working basically on its own, and then we will we'll add another route that returns JSON instead of HTML. So I'm just going to run this just to see what happens. So Python server.py. Okay, so it tells me that it's running and it's waiting for a request. So I'm gonna go ahead and open up another. Actually, let me do that side by side. I'm just gonna curl localhost 9292, and I don't get anything. I get an error here. So from the client's perspective, it just didn't work. But I have insight into the internals of the server, and it says parsed request is missing a key. So what I need to do is create some kind of, it looks like looking at the rest of my code and trying to reverse engineer it. So client request, which comes from here. This is a request object, the instance of the request object. And it looks like it's expecting there to be a property called parsed request, which looks like it's getting created here. So when you create an instance of request, the init runs, which calls this parse request method, which then creates this parsed request property. And right now it's just assigning it to none. But this parse request looks like the rest of the code is expecting this to have a key called URI. So at the very least, I know I'm going to have to make something called an object with a key called URI. So let's see if I just change that. And now I'm going to run the server again. And I'm going to make a request. And now it's just hanging. So I'm not getting an error, at least I'm not getting the same error, but it's just hanging. So it's not quite doing what I want it to do, but this part is now at least not broken. So I'm going to stop everything, and it's checking the value of URI. So if it equals this, then it's going to do something. So I'm just going to go ahead and make this for now. And I'm going to run the server. And it looks like I get a response. So I can keep making a request and I keep getting responses. So this looks like it's working now. I've kind of hard coded it, so I don't want to do that, but at least I have figured out the structure of what it's expecting. So let's assume that this is working. We can come back to that in a second. So what is this actually doing? Client connection. So this is something that comes from the HTTP server, which I would have to look up. And then there's a send method on that. And it looks like what you send is some kind of binary stuff. And you can build the response. So by calling build HTML response, which looks like it just returns a string basically. So it returns a string which conforms to the HTTP protocol, which has this, HTTP1 and so on. So I'm going to curl example.com, and I'm going to do it in verbose mode, -v. And you can see here that here's the format of an HTTP request. Get whatever, HTTP1. Let me see. Yeah. So HTTP1. So this is the response that it's going to send.
So is everything under the HTTP1, is that considered a header?
Yeah, basically. So there are, these key values are the real headers. I'm not sure if this would technically be considered a header.
So after the space, maybe those are headers, sort of.
So this, I forget what this is called, but this is the first line, and then these are all key value pairs that are headers that you can send. So if I make this request using this curl client, these are the headers that it sends. But if I use a different client, it can send different headers. And if I use Postman, I can tell it what headers to send and so on. But this is the response. So the response is right here, HTTP/1.1 200 OK. So in my server, I'm kind of imitating that. And then I'm including a couple headers. One is content type. So it knows that it's going to be getting text or HTML. We'll end up changing that to JSON, and then the content length, and then the actual body, which comes here. Notice here we have all the metadata information, and then there's a new line, and then we get the actual payload, the actual thing we care about, which is an HTML document. So that's how this is working. Basically, I get a request, I dig through the request, and I try to get the URI, which is, so here's the request. Where's that slash coming from? It's actually right there. So how can I access this little bit of information instead of just hard coding it right here? Well, I have something here. So I'm gonna first off just print this. Print. Actually, yeah. And I'm gonna run this in debug mode. I'm gonna stop this. And okay, so now it's running and it's waiting for a request. So I'm gonna go where it was. I'm gonna do this over here. Let's move it back here. I'm in the debug terminal. Now I'm gonna make a curl request. Curl localhost 9292. And I'm now hitting this breakpoint here. So now in the, let's see, in the debug console, I'm gonna do decoded request text and see what that is. So it's a list with a bunch of different indices right there. So there's get /HB1, post blah, blah, blah. And if I compare that with the results of, let's stop this, throw example.com with the verbose flag, and I look here, I can see that this is a list, and each one of these lines is something in that list. So I need to get the first item in that list, which is this, and then pull out this. So this is just the string manipulation. There's nothing special happening there. So I'm gonna rerun this again. I'm gonna make another request. It's gonna stop there, and I'm gonna check this out. You can also just, print this, whatever. I'm just using the interactive terminal. And so I want to do decoded at 0. What does that look like? Okay, that's good. Now, how do I get the slash? Well, it looks like every element is separated by a space. So dot split by space. What is that going to get me? Okay, and then I get the first element of that. And that's my slash. So I'm going to take this and I'm going to replace this. Okay, so I'm gonna stop everything here. I'm gonna not, I'm just gonna run this regularly. Python, go back over here. Okay, so I'm waiting for a request. I'm gonna make my curl request right here. And it looks like it's working now. So instead of hard coding that, I'm now getting it dynamically. And if I make a new request, /time, well, now it hangs because I'm not handling that. Okay, so let's implement the time route. Any questions so far? All right, so I'm gonna just make this a JSON response. So I'm just gonna copy this because it should be very similar. And instead of build HTML, I'm gonna do build JSON response. And I'm gonna copy this. It should be basically the same, and I'm gonna replace this with JSON. Okay, so let's take a look here. So if I were to run this, even though it's not actually JSON, all right, so before I do that, let me make a request to an endpoint that returns JSON so I can see what some of the headers look like. So to do that, I'm gonna go to JSON placeholder. This is the example that we've showed you guys before. So I'm gonna grab right here. And I could go, there's a couple ways I could see what the headers are. So I'm gonna go, I could use curl, of course, or any other client. I'm gonna go in DevTools here just to show you something different. I'm gonna go to network. I'm gonna make the request again. And then I can see the request right here. This is actually, let's see. Let me look at the response headers. So the response headers, this is what the server is sending. So I can see, let me see, do we have content type? Let me try this with Postman. Okay, I'm gonna look at the headers over here. Content type. So I'm not sure why that was not displaying in the browser. I have to dig around a little bit. Am I missing something? Anyway, so yeah, sorry, I'm not sure why that's not showing up in the browser, but in Postman I can see it. Content type, and the content type is application/JSON. So I'm gonna copy that, and instead of content type text HTML, this is gonna be application JSON. And the body is not going to be an HTML document. It's going to be JSON. So how do you make JSON?
Gonna dump it.
Yeah, okay. So I can import, it's already imported here. So I'm going to do JSON dot dumps. I can't remember if it's dumps or dump.
I think it's dumps.
Dumps. So dumps will actually return something. And then I can pass it an object. So this will be current time or whatever you want it to be. And then time dot, I think this is the daytime. Daytime dot now. Something like that. This is a datetime object, so I'm just gonna convert this to a string, just in case. And then I'll replace this with the JSON body. So I'm gonna give this a try and see if it works. So I really don't need to pass in anything right now. So I'm just gonna remove that. Okay, so now I'm gonna try running the server again. And this time I'll use Postman to make the request. Local host 9292/time. I'm going to send this request and I get a response. So let's see what the response body is. It is JSON. So this is working now. I sent just 2 response headers. So this is pretty minimal. I can send all kinds of other ones. But depending on the client, some clients are more forgiving than others. But I think this is kind of the minimum you need. Okay, any questions about that? And then real quick, I'm going to do a very minimal example of what it would be like to build a front end to consume that. So index.html. app.js. I'm going to do window.onLoad. There's a callback function. In index.html, I need to connect this. So this will be script. And then source is app.js. I think I can do async defer as well. Okay. All right, so my my server is still running. I can still make requests to it. I think it's still running. Maybe it's not running. Again, so run the server, make a request. Okay, so it's like there's an issue with the server here. So the connection is not closing. Let me see. I wonder if this is an issue with client. So I'm gonna cancel that.
We actually ran into this. Was it Philip? When we were doing multiple hits to this, it was not going through, it was hanging up.
Yeah, I'm wondering if it's the client. So I'm gonna try it with Perl. And let's see, Perl/time. So working with Perl, so this is just, so this is a protocol, right? This is a protocol, and every client is going to be a little different, unfortunately. So Postman, it looks like it's doing some extra magic. Maybe it's expecting something else, or it's trying to keep the connection alive for some reason. So I'm not exactly sure. And so let me also try it with the browser. So curl does what we expect. Postman hangs after the first request for some reason. Not quite sure why. Let's try it in the browser. So localhost /time. All right, I'll make another request. So looks like that's fine. So, yeah, sorry, not exactly sure why, but you know, every client is going to be a little different. Every server is going to be a little different. That's the nature of the business. I could dig in and maybe try to figure out why, but I don't have time for that right now. So, but yeah, just know you should definitely just be aware that, as you can see, because you're building it from pretty low level components, that you know you can do it a little differently, and depends on, you know, you could build this server a little differently, and you can actually make this even more restricted, give less information about content type, like not pass any headers at all, for example. And you might find that some clients will allow that and some clients won't. So yeah. Okay, so let's assume that this works now. So I'm going to go here and app.js. I'm just going to fetch. I'm just going to do this in one block because I don't want to spend a lot of time on it. So first off, I'm going to grab that div element. So document dot query selector, and this is a div, so I give it a hashtag, and this is called root. And then I'm going to make a fetch request. Actually, I'm going to do this using the .then syntax instead of the async await. Fetch, and the endpoint is http://localhost. I think this will work. Port 9292/time, and then .then. I get the response. So this is actually the response header. So response.json. And then once I do that, then I have access to the actual data, the body, which should be JSON. And I'm going to do div.inner HTML. I'm just going to drop this in here. It's not going to look pretty, but that's fine. There's two string here. Forget how this works. String. You can use a constructor body. I'm going to try that, and we'll see if this works. So I'm going to run this with live server. And I'm going to look at the network tab. I'm going to making a request to /time. Is this request coming in? Let me go back to the server. I'm going to not print this out. Cancel this, run this again. And let's see if this request comes in. Okay. So what's my problem now?
The course.
Yeah. So how do you, someone tell me what CORS is.
It's like an anti-theft thing, so I can't make a request to somebody else's website and just steal all the content from it.
Yeah, basically it's a security mechanism that's implemented by browsers, and it says if you get a web page that comes from example.com, you can't just start making requests to, othersite.com without them telling you that you have permission to do that. But was anyone able to fix this?
Yes.
Okay. How did you fix it?
In the JSON response header.
Yep.
I had to add allow, it's like, so like right after content length in that header,
Yep.
I added, like, \r \n allow, I had to look at the README,
Yeah,
allow
that's fine. But
something,
access,
or
yeah, access, control, allow, origin, and there's a few ways you can handle it. You can use a star, which would be allow anything from any domain. And just to show you, so if I go to, where was this JSON? Go here, go to users, and look at the headers. I'm gonna try this Postman. Copy this. So this is not quite the same thing, but I think this is probably a custom header that they have. But anyway, so I mean, you have to figure this out by digging around and looking stuff up. Once you did that, you add this header, and it should work now. So if I go to this web page that I have, which is getting served up from this port, and I'm making a request to a different port, so that's a different, I'm getting it from one place and I'm making a request somewhere else. That's a cross origin request. Let me view. Let me try stopping this. Starting this again. I think that was coming in. Sorry.
would it have to be added to the JSON response as well, since you're trying to access the time endpoint?
Yeah, I mean, ideally it would be both, but I think since I'm just accessing the time endpoint, it really only needs to be there. I think that, let me try this here. 9292/time. So this header is not getting picked up. Let me try moving this somewhere else.
I think you just put it in the wrong function.
Oh,
Right.
oh, sorry. Yeah. Yeah, geez. My bad. Yeah. All right, so I'm gonna restart this.
So with the star right there, does it just allow anyone
Yeah.
anywhere to access?
Yep. Yeah, you can also specify, like, I could specify, localhost port 5500 or wherever this is coming from. So now this header is added.
Cool.
Or you just use a wildcard. So wildcard is the simplest thing, just allow anything. And because this is not I'm not doing anything sensible here. I'm just trying to turn into a string. There's probably a way to JSON.stringify, I think. Stringify, I think that might look better. Again. Okay. So yeah, whatever, but this is actually the HTML. Okay, so that's the basic process. You can create a server from pretty much scratch. As you can see, it's just a bunch of like functions and stuff like that. You're basically just, it's basically just string manipulation. You get a request, which is, bytes, which you can convert to a string, and then you dig through that to figure out what kind of response you send. And the response you send is basically going to be a string of one sort or another. It's probably going to be an HTML document or JSON. And then you just decide what you want to do based on the request, and then you send a response.
So with the HTTP request, you're basically trying to see if your request matches an endpoint on the server, and then the server returns whatever data is in that endpoint. Correct?
Yep. Yeah. And you can do whatever other logic you want here as well. So it can be, more or less complicated. But for example, let me go to, so here's /users/ blah, blah, blah. So here's an endpoint which probably doesn't exist on the server. So in this case, the server has decided to just send me back an empty object. So it looks like that's just an implementation choice. So whoever built this decided, hey, if someone goes to an endpoint that doesn't exist, just send them back an empty object.
Could you also get like a 404?
Yeah. So it looks like you actually are getting a 404, but then they're sending you back an empty object as well.
Oh, okay. Cool.
So the response. Let's see. So the response headers, blah blah blah. Yeah, it's easier to see this stuff in Postman. So let me just do that right here. So I can see status 404 not found. But it still sends me back an empty object in the body. But that, they don't have to do that, right? This is just a decision that whoever wrote this server made. So you could have a default like HTML page, like not found, or you can do any number of things. Or you could also just not handle it and throw an error.
So basically like a website is structured to where every web page is an endpoint on a server.
Essentially, so we'll see later on that it doesn't exactly work that way, but historically, yes. Historically, it did work that way.
Cool.
So a URL is kind of mapped to like a file system on the server, for example. So you could think about this as like, I want to look up this thing in the file system on a server in another computer.
I did a cool thing when I was messing around with it as well. I was just talking with one of my friends from outside here, but he gave me like Google's IP, and like you can just put like their IP in there, and it just pulls you straight into kind of like how we're doing local host in our port.
Yeah.
You can throw their IP in there, and it throws you straight to Google's website, and then the port, it just determines a default port that they use. I think it was port 80 or something, but the port part didn't matter. But yeah, it's just cool that you can just throw like the IP in there and it throws you straight to their website.
Yeah, exactly. So the reality is like the actual architecture is going to be a lot more complicated because they're going to have all kinds of like proxies and stuff like that. But basically, yeah. So and the default port for HTTP is port 80. And then for HTTPS encrypted, it's 442. So these are just conventions. You can make your server and only listen on port, 9032 or whatever you decide.
How many ports does a computer have? Just unlimited?
It's like, so each IP address will have it's like 65,000 or something like that ports. And some of them are reserved, so the lower numbers. I think anything below like 2,000 or so is going to be like reserved, basically. But yeah, you have a lot of ports to choose from. Okay, let's take 5 minutes and we'll come back and do, I guess, today's official lesson.